Hello, my friend, and welcome to this study. It's time for our July study almanac. So in these languid summer days, come with me and we'll delve into the month of July together here in the study. Just you and me and the sounds. The summer reaches its apogee with long days almost hovering before they begin to shorten with the end of August. The July days are languid. The frenzy of wild growth of plants has slackened. The rushed mating season of animals and birds is finished. The skies, when clear, show us their deepest and brightest blues. When cloudy, they treat us to the tumultuous thunderstorms of cool solstice rain to break the heat of the days, sending steam up from the roadways and over the meadows, and in between the towering, fluffy white clouds seem to float as great, serene fortresses of mystery, holding dreams and adventures in their vaporous depths. The sounds of summer are at their peak now too. The fully clothed trees with their mature leaves, the flowering plants, roses, hydrangeas, irises, and many others, in their rainbow of colors, all bloomed now these past months, and having grown to established greatness, regally overseeing the garden beds and woodland paths. Wafting in breezes and dripping after the rains, the lazy streams, the undulating ocean waves, the sounds of young birds, and the buzzing of the July bugs, making a backdrop for a languorous daydream. Because the northern hemisphere has so little darkness around the solstice in June, the wonders of the night might be difficult to spot. But by the end of July, the night skies begin slowly to be more visible as we now move towards the equinox. This is a good time to spot the brightest part of the Milky Way as it winds its way down from the overhead point towards the southwest horizon. It flows along the eastern edge of the giant summer triangle asterism, the one we first began to see in June in its beauty. It is a large triangle formed from the three bright stars Deneb in Cygnus, Vega in Lyra, and Altair in Aquila, all being the principal alpha stars of those constellations. We can clearly pick out Cygnus by its pronounced cross shape stretching along the band of the Milky Way, sometimes called the Northern Cross. As the Milky Way passes Deneb, it appears to split in two, a dark rift dividing the two resulting sections. Just south of Deneb, the split is fairly wide, leading to a region known as the Northern Coalsack. The main split, passing down through Cygnus, is known as the Cygnus Rift. Vega's host, Lyra, the lyre, a harp-like musical instrument with a stringed section represented by a sort of squashed diamond pattern of stars in the southeast of Vega, will give us some inspiration for July, because a lyre is often associated with a poet or one who sings of epics and lays and stories and adventures. Elsewhere, the beautiful Ring Nebula sits just a fraction south of the midpoint of the line between the lower two stars of this pattern, the rifts. So the Milky Way is quite something to see on a dark July night. 2,100 light years away in the Cygnus constellation is the remnant of a supernova. The Veil Nebula is the visible remains of a star 20 times the mass of our Sun, thought to have met its violent end at least 10,000 years ago. As it began to die, its swan song, as it were, the star expelled a giant bubble of gas outwards into the surrounding interstellar medium, creating a continually expanding spherical nebula known as the Cygnus Loop, which now extends 110 light years across. Its continual expansion has been measured at 1.5 million kilometers per hour. The Cygnus Loop emits visible, radio, infrared, and X-ray radiation, with the entire loop only revealed when combining images in each of these wavelengths. And colorized, it can be very beautiful. The visible part of the Cygnus Loop gives us the Veil Nebula, a sprawling region of cloud so big that it is sometimes split into different sections: the Eastern Veil, the Western Veil, and Pickering's Triangle. If you'd like to view it, make sure you have as dark a sky as possible, with no glare of the moon. A small telescope or binoculars will be ideal at this time of year. Now is the ideal time to look for Mars. On the 28th of July, Mars will be there in the evening sky, joined by a waxing crescent moon, very low above the western horizon, right around 10 p.m. British Summer Time. Then on the 31st of this month, Saturn rises at about 11 p.m. and reaches a descent altitude above the south-southeast horizon before dawn takes hold. This planet sat south of the celestial equator for years, but is now poised just 1.5 degrees south of it. For stars, we have many shooting stars at this time. The Perseid meteor shower is one with a high hourly rate, and bright meteors visible this year from 17th of July until the 24th of August, during which time the number of meteors will steadily increase every night, reaching a peak on the 12th of August. After this peak, meteors will tail off until the end of the shower, and seem to originate from the constellation Perseus, where we get the name. On Wednesday, the 30th, the end of July, the southern Delta Aquarid meteor shower reaches peak activity, with a maximum of around 25 meteors per hour. This is a great meteor activity for summer. So adding to our mystery, or our summer of mystique, we have these shooting stars. Don't forget to make a wish if you see one. And lastly, in the sky, we have our moon. In its lunar standstill this year is always a source of mystic influence, a celestial body that floats above, looking both at the earth and its goings-on, and towards the cosmic theatre of the heavens. The new moon and dark sky late in this month of summer can represent a time of surrender and release, a respite from the culmination of energies and activities, a quiet place for new beginnings, not the charged beginning of spring and new life, but a golden summer beginning of something new, something remembered, something left behind and picked up again with quiet confidence, something seen more clearly from a quiet place of peace and intuition. July is the month and season of the bug, the buzz of the last bumblebees, but also of the damselflies, dragonflies, grasshoppers, crickets, and beetles. The buzz of July is in the air. A few bird species will have already begun their migration back south towards parts of southern Europe and Africa during this month, and it is the cuckoo who usually starts this early exodus. Already crossed the English Channel, they will be making their way down through France. As many birds have finished raising their young, they will begin their annual molt, and goldfinches will be eating the seeds that are coming out. Young peregrines and ospreys will be learning to hunt and fish. Those late nesting birds, the passerines, continuing raising their young, include the swift, swallow, house martin, and sand martin. Many of these species may have arrived late to British shores, but if the conditions are right, weather and food, they will also attempt to raise 2 or possibly even 3 broods during the summer. This passerine group of birds is predominantly insect eaters, and their success each year depends upon a plentiful supply of flying insects, helped by dry, warmer, and sunny conditions of July. Climate change and sudden changes in weather patterns, with unusually strong summer storms, will have a significant impact on their numbers. In recent years, partly due to the Gulf and jet stream changes in position, these numbers have fluctuated. Apropos to our year of lunar spectacle, the moon jellyfish enjoys the rising sea temperatures off Britain's coast and can be observed in July feeding on the plankton blooms. Additionally, 2 species of seahorse, long having dropped in number in Britain, have now begun resurgence in population growth off the Isle of Wight. Other animals, too, enjoy the burgeoning of insects, including the woodland bats. Smaller mammals will benefit during the warmer, drier months with the longer daylight hours, providing them with an opportunity for a plentiful supply of food sources. These animals include the voles, shrews, mice, rabbits, and hares. Young stoats and weasels are at play as they mature. Foxes and badgers are also active during these warmer months, usually at dusk, during darkness, and in the early morning, when the air temperatures are much cooler. Deer, foxes, and otters are among the UK's largest mammals. Otters are steeped in mystique. Their normal activity happens during the night, and they are a protected species now, so their numbers are slowly starting to increase in Britain. Otters are ready to reproduce from 2 to 3 years of age, and their mating season depends on the area in which they live. If their habitat is thriving and there's enough room for them, and with a plentiful and continued supply of food, they will tend to mate more than once during each season. Very active mammals during July in Britain. Our summer birds of the month include the cormorant, kittiwake, herring gull, common gull, grey-lag goose, lapwing, curlew, common redshank, and spotted redshank. Although kittiwakes can first easily be mistaken for a species of gull, they have a distinctly more gentle appearance, lacking the rather wicked or vicious look of some seagulls. Kittiwakes favor coastal areas as opposed to inland locations, and can often be seen sharing cliff faces and nest sites along the guillemots and razorbills, which we saw last month. Kittiwakes feed on invertebrates and fish, and possibly some of the moon jellyfish. For our destination of the month of July, we'll come to it via a rather roundabout way. We begin in London in the 18th century in Soho Square. Soho Square was licensed in 1676 and building begun from 1677 onward was at first known as Frith Square, after Richard Frith, the originator and chief builder, and subsequently known as King's Square, and later Soho Square. Some say the King's Square might refer to the statue of Charles II. First house leases were granted in 1679. And the entire south side of the square was comprised of Monmouth House, the Duke of Monmouth. The house, however, was seen as being unlucky. Frith began work on this house in 1682. The Duke, one of the earliest residents of the square, was in occupation of the part of the unfinished Monmouth House by 1683 or 84. However, he left England that year and only returned for that fatal rebellion of Monmouth. And then he was executed, and the empty and unfinished house was left to decay for more than 20 years, while the Duchess and various creditors argued over its fate. Even when one buyer, Sir James Bateman, the Lord Mayor, was found in 1717, he died before alterations that he had ordered could be finished. A number of misfortunes were connected with this house, and it became rather unlucky. But other residents of this house included Charles Howard, later first Earl of Carlisle, who was living there by 1685. Despite this Monmouth House on the south side being unlucky, the square was rather popular for other residents. People like John Evelyn, who took a house for the season, and French and Russian at Monmouth House. Venetian, Spanish, and Neapolitan ambassadors also lived there. The Soho Academy, which became the best private school in London, was at number 1 from 1717 and number 8 from 1805. This square continued to rise in popularity. In the 18th century, a lot of the original leases expired, and it opened up to more residents. The most important of these were at number 20 at the north end in Carlisle House, where St. Patrick's Church and its presbytery exists now. This house was built for Charles Howard, later 1st Earl of Carlisle, living there by 1685, and this remained in the family's townhouse until 1753. It was the most celebrated pleasure resort in London between 1760 and 1772, when it was occupied by the opera singer and adventuress Teresa Cornelis, who attracted the whole town to her subscription assemblies, masquerades, balls, and musical entertainments. The Bach-Abel concerts were given there in 1765 to 68 and 1774, after which they moved to the Hanover Square Rooms. In March 1779, Sir Joseph Banks and his new wife settled in a large house here at number 32. It continued to be his London residence for the remainder of his life. There he welcomed many distinguished guests over the years, scientists, students, and authors, as well as eminent visitors from overseas, librarians, and curators of his collections. Sir Joseph Banks, 1st Baronet, G.C.B. F.R.S., 1743 to 1820, was a naturalist, botanist, and patron and pioneer of the natural sciences. Even from his early years, Banks had a keen interest in natural history. He left his studies at Oxford to help his mother in her house in Chelsea in December 1763, where he attended the Chelsea Physic Garden of the Worshipful Society of Apothecaries and the British Museum. He met the Swedish naturalist Daniel Solander and made friends with the leading scientific men of his day. Banks corresponded with Carl Linnaeus, and his influence increased. He became an advisor to King George III and urged the monarch to support voyages of discovery to new lands, hoping to indulge his own interest in botany. In 1766, Banks was elected to the Royal Society and went to Newfoundland and Labrador with a view to studying their natural history. He published the first Linnaean descriptions of the plants and animals of Newfoundland and Labrador, documenting 34 species of birds, including the great auk, which became extinct by 1844. It was after this success that Banks was appointed to a joint Royal Navy, Royal Society scientific expedition to the South Pacific Ocean on HMS Endeavour that would take place from 1768 to 1771, the first of James Cook's voyages of discovery in that region. Banks personally funded 8 others to join him: the Swedish naturalist Daniel Solander, Finnish naturalist Hermann Spöring, Banks's personal secretary and draftsman, artists Sidney Parkinson and Alexander Buchan, as well as 4 servants from his estate, James Roberts, Peter Briscoe, Thomas Richmond, and George Dalton. The voyage went to Brazil, where Banks made the first scientific description of a now common garden plant, bougainvillea, named after Cook's French counterpart, Louis-Antoine de Bougainville. Then to Tahiti, where the transit of Venus was to be observed, the nominal purpose of the mission, and then on to New Zealand. From there they proceeded to the east coast of Australia, where Cook, that cartographer extraordinaire, mapped the coastline, making landfall at Botany Bay and then in Queensland for repairs because they had struck the Great Barrier Reef. While ashore, Banks, Daniel Solander, and the Finnish botanist Hermann Spöring made the first major collection of Australian fauna, describing many species entirely new to science. Almost 800 specimens were illustrated by Sidney Parkinson. After his return to England on 12th July 1771, Banks intended to go with Cook on the second voyage, which would begin on the 13th of May 1772 on board Cook's new ship, HMS Resolution. But there had been a dispute with the Admiralty, and Banks' naturalist demands eventually deemed unacceptable. The Admiralty withdrew its permission for Banks to sail. Here we have some correspondence between Banks and Cook. These are some of Cook's letters following this decision by the Admiralty. Here we have a letter from James Cook to Joseph Banks, Esquire, New Burlington Street, London. Captain Cook received. Here, I've opened it on the wrong side. So we've got Sheerness, 2nd of June, 1772. Sir, I received your letter by one of your people, acquainting me that you had ordered everything belonging to you to be removed out of the ship, and desiring my assistance therein. I hope, sir, you will find this done to your satisfaction, and with that care the present hurry and confused state of the ship required, some few articles which were for the mess I have kept, for which, together with the money I have remaining in my hands, I shall account with you for when I come to town. Taught by experience not to trust the knowledge of servants the whole of every necessary article wanting in such a voyage, I had, independent of what I purchased for the mess, laid in a stock of mess articles, which will be now quite sufficient for me, and is the reason why I have not kept more of yours. The cook and 2 French hornmen are at liberty to go whenever they please. Several of the casks your things are in belong to the king, and are charged to me, and for which I must be accountable. I shall much be obliged to you to send them to the victualling office when they are emptied, but desire that you will by no means put yourself to any inconveniency on this head, as I shall not be called upon to account for them until my return. If it should not be convenient to send down for what may still be remaining in this ship of yours, they shall be sent you by, Sir, your most obedient and very humble servant, James Cook. I pray my best respects to the doctor, and since I am not to have your company in the Resolution, I most sincerely wish you success in all your exploring undertakings. And we have a second one, written later. From the ship, Resolution, Cape of Good Hope, 18th November, 1772. Dear Sir, some cross circumstances which happened at the latter part of the equipment of the Resolution created, I have reason to think, a coolness betwixt you and I, but I can by no means think it was sufficient for me to break off all correspondence with a man I am under my obligations to. So, definitely a sea captain, with his makeshift grammar. I wish I had something interesting to communicate, but our passage here has rather been barren on that head. We touch at Santiago, where we remained 2 days, and Mr. Foster got some things there new in your way. Mr. Brand has got for you a fine collection, as I am told. I depart from hence in a day or two, well stored with every necessary thing, but am told the French from the Mauritius have got the start of me. About 8 months ago 2 ships from that island discovered land in the latitude of 48 degrees, and about the meridian of the Mauritius, along which they said 40 miles till they came to a bay into which they were about to enter, when they were separated and drove off the coast by a gale of wind. The one got to the Mauritius soon after, and the other is said since arrived from Batavia with a cargo of arrack, as the report goes here. Also in March, the last 2 frigates from the same island touched here, in their way to the South Seas, having on board the man Bougainville brought back from Ostave or Tahiti, and who died before the ships departed from hence, a circumstance I am really sorry for. These ships were to touch somewhere on the coast of America, and afterwards to proceed round Cape Horn. I am in your debt for the pickled and dried salmon which you left on board, which a little time ago was most excellent. But the 8 casks of pickled salted fish I kept for myself proved so bad that even the hogs would not eat it. These hints may be of use to you in providing for your intended expedition, in which I wish you all the success you can with yourself, and am with great esteem and respect, Doctor, dear Sir, your most obliged humble servant, James Cook. Undeterred, in 1772, a mere year after his return from exploring the Pacific with Cook, Banks immediately arranged an alternative expedition, and in July 1772, Daniel Solander and Banks visited the Isle of Wight, the Hebrides, the Orkney Islands, and Iceland aboard Sir Lawrence, and were the first scientific visitors to the island of Staffa in the Inner Hebrides, where they visited a most extraordinary cave. On 13th of August, Banks and his party, including the artist James Miller, explored, measured, and drew Staffa. Banks's travel journal was to appear in Thomas Pennant's 1774-76 multi-volume A Tour in Scotland and Voyage to the Hebrides, 1772. On their return, they stopped in Edinburgh, where Banks and Solander were interviewed by James Boswell, who himself toured Scotland not long after with his friend Samuel Johnson. In 1778, Banks was elected President of the Royal Society, a position he was to hold with great distinction for over 41 years. Banks also had great influence on the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, making it the world's leading botanical garden, and helped establish the Royal Academy. He is credited for bringing 30,000 plant specimens home with him, and was the first European to document 1,400 of them. He is also credited with introducing the eucalyptus, acacia, and the banksia, genus named after him, to the Western world. Around 80 species of plants bear his name. One man had achieved so much in his lifetime, travelled so far, discovered and catalogued so much of the natural world, and contributed to its understanding by a wider public. Yet it was perhaps Fingal's Cave that made an immediate and lasting place in the imagination of the populace. This cave is our destination for our July Almanac. While on the island of Staffa, Banks visited several sea caves, and wrote his first and perhaps the most influential study of its geological features and about his experience at looking upon Fingal's Cave, the most famous of these sea caves. It was Banks's account that put a seed into the popular interest in caves, but this one in particular, from the scientific to the imaginative, initiating a flurry of tourism to the island by some of the most eminent writers, composers, and artists of the Romantic era and far beyond. The Vikings had called this place the Isle of Staves, hence Staffa, because of the vertical basalt columns that are geological formations peculiar to this area, formations which also consist in the Giant's Causeway to the southwest of Staffa, on the northern Irish coast. Around 50 to 60 million years ago, during the Paleocene, intense volcanic activity resulted in highly fluid molten basalt, which intruded through chalk beds to form an extensive volcanic plateau. This plateau was called the Tulian Plateau, that covers this area the Inner Hebrides and Antrim. Thule, after the famed and elusive place written about by Pliny. As the lava cooled, contraction occurred. Horizontal contraction fractured in a similar way to drying mud, with the cracks propagating down as the mass cooled, leaving pillar-like structures. The size of the columns was primarily determined by the speed at which lava cooled. The extensive fracture network produced the distinctive columns seen today. At 72 feet tall and 270 feet deep, Fingal's Cave is a remarkable demonstration of the power of nature. Banks never did publish his own account of his visit to the Hebrides, but his account is preserved as excerpted from his journal, edited and published by his friend Thomas Pennant in his tour of Scotland, 1772. Poor weather had prevented Pennant from landing on the island in his trip subsequent to Banks, and Banks allowed him to use 5 of his drawings and his notes, which supplied that deficiency. Pennant inserted his text in the complete description by Banks of his trip to Staffa and Fingal's cave. In his notes, Banks claims to have discovered a cave the most significant, I suppose, than has ever been described by travellers. "We asked the name of it," writes Banks. Said our guide, "The Cave of Finn." "What is Finn?" said we. "Finn McCool, whom the translator of Ossian's works has called Fingal." How fortunate that in this cave we should meet with a remembrance of that chief whose existence, as well as that of the whole epic poem, is almost doubted in England. It was to Banks's account that so encouraged the connection between poems of a certain Ossian, son of Fingal, that may be credited the birth of one of Scotland's leading tourist destinations in the Romantic era. Visitors began to come from all over Europe in homage to Ossian, the narrator and supposed author of a cycle of epic poems published by the Scottish poet James Macpherson. Following on the popularity of Fingal's cave, Macpherson claimed to have collected oral poetry, translating it from the Gaelic, composed by Ossian, based on Oisin, son of Finn or Fionn McCool, a legendary Irish bard. In 1760, Macpherson published his English-language text, fragments of ancient poetry collected in the Highlands of Scotland and translated from the Gaelic or Erse language. Later that year, he claimed to have obtained further manuscripts, and in 1761 he claimed to have found an epic on the subject of the hero Fingal, with Fingal or Fionchal meaning fair stranger, supposedly written by Ossian. During the next few years, his work culminated in a collected edition, The Works of Ossian, in 1765. The most famous of these Ossianic poems was Fingal, written in 1761 and dated 1762. At the time, there was fierce controversy over authenticity of the work, which was also mentioned by Samuel Johnson on his Hebrides expedition, as well as by the French volcanologist Barthélemy Fouillard de Saint-Fond when he visited in 1784, and it is now accepted that Macpherson framed the poems himself and based them on folk tales. Despite the disputed authenticity that had immediately surrounded the work, it became hugely popular. Translated into all the literary languages of Europe, the cycle was influential in the development of Romanticism and especially in the development of romantic linguistic nationalism of the sort epitomized by the Gaelic revival and the fame of the cave. In France, Napoleon's enthusiasm for Ossian's poems accounts for most of its artistic depictions, including those by the most famous artists. In 1800, the Château de Malmaison was renovated for Napoleon as a summer palace, and 2 large and significant works were among those painted for the reception hall. These were Girodet's painting of 1801, Ossian receiving the ghosts of the French heroes, and Ossian evoking ghosts on the edge of the Loire, by François Pascal Simon Girard. A watercolor copy by Jean-Baptiste Isabey was placed as a frontispiece to Napoleon's copy of the poems. Exiled on St. Helena, Napoleon's friends were his many books, and here in his will he bequeaths 400 of them to his son. One of those was Ossian's Fingal, or rather Macpherson's Ossian epics. Among a few of the artists, composers, authors, and poets who were inspired by the magnificence of Fingal's Cave were Walter Scott, John Keats, Jules Verne, Felix Mendelssohn in his Hebrides Overture during his visit in August 1829, and 2 years later in 1831 when Joseph Turner visited and later painted his magnificent Staffa, Fingal's Cave. And there, my friend, is our July in the study. I hope you've enjoyed our big bumper Almanac edition for July. I wish you sweet dreams and many happy hours in these dog days of summer. Be good to yourself. Be kind to others, and be extraordinary.